You've probably lost something small without ever noticing the exact moment it happened. A coin slips out of a pocket. A receipt blows off a counter. It's gone, and you never think about where it actually ended up. In June 1965, an American astronaut lost something the exact same way, except he was floating outside a spacecraft at the time, and what he lost is still up there today, and it never decayed, never rotted, and never really stopped moving. His name was Ed White, and he had just become the first American to ever walk in space. Gemini 4 was only supposed to be a short test of whether a human being could survive outside a capsule at all. White unclipped himself, drifted out into open space connected only by a thin tether, and spent 23 minutes testing what his body could do with nothing around it but vacuum. At one point, while maneuvering back toward the hatch, one of his gloves slipped free. He watched it drift away from his hand, spinning slowly, catching sunlight completely beyond his reach. NASA tracked it afterward. That single glove became, for a short time, the most dangerous piece of debris in low Earth orbit, moving at the same speed as the spacecraft that lost it, technically capable of damaging anything it collided with. It orbited the planet on its own for about a month before it finally burned up, entering the atmosphere. A glove. Drifting around the entire Earth alone, with nothing to stop it, until gravity finally pulled it back down. If that glove had been a person instead, the only difference would have been distance and time. 43 years later, almost the same thing happened again, except this time, people on the ground could actually watch it happen with their own eyes. In November 2008, astronaut Heidemarie Stephanischen Piper was repairing a piece of equipment outside the International Space Station when a bag of tools slipped out of her grip. Wrenches, a grease gun, tools designed to fix some of the most expensive machinery humans have ever built, gone in seconds, tumbling away into orbit. NASA didn't just shrug this off. They calculated its exact path, and astronomers and amateur skywatchers on the ground began tracking it on purpose, because for a while, that drifting tool bag was bright enough to see from your own backyard with a decent pair of binoculars, sometimes even with the naked eye on a clear night. People stood outside in their backyards, looked up at a perfectly ordinary night sky, and watched someone else's lost tools cross the stars like a tiny man-made shooting star, completely unaware of how strange that moment actually was. Somewhere up there, a bag designed to help fix a multi-billion-dollar space station was now just debris, drifting past constellations, visible from the ground but utterly unreachable by anyone on it. It eventually burned up, entering the atmosphere too, about 8 months later. That wasn't even the strangest thing NASA has ever lost on purpose by accident. In 2006, during a spacewalk on shuttle mission SDS-121, astronaut Piers Sellers was testing a repair technique using a small spatula-shaped tool meant to patch damaged heat shield tiles. The tool slipped out of his hand. Mission Control watched it tumble away on camera in real time, and within hours, news outlets around the world were running headlines about NASA's missing spatula, drifting somewhere above the planet, fully tracked, fully cataloged, completely unreachable. It sounds almost funny until you remember what it actually represents. A tool built by some of the most careful engineers on Earth, lost in under a second, now circling the planet completely outside anyone's control, just like everything else that slips out of a hand up there. The United States Space Surveillance Network actually tracks every one of these lost objects on purpose, because even a lost glove or a wandering spatula is large enough and fast enough to be genuinely dangerous to other spacecraft. As of recent counts, the network actively tracks more than 27,000 human-made objects in orbit, most of them too small to ever be useful again, every single one of them cataloged, numbered, and watched, because once something leaves a person's hand up there, it doesn't just disappear. It becomes its own small, permanent resident of space until physics eventually decides otherwise. Here's the part that should actually unsettle you. Both of those objects were in low Earth orbit, just a few hundred kilometers up, which means Earth's atmosphere was always going to catch them eventually and pull them back down to burn. That's the only reason their story has an ending at all. If either of those objects had been lost further out, beyond the reach of the atmosphere, there would be no ending, no re-entry, no burning up. Just an object drifting in the exact same orbit forever, because there's nothing out there to slow it down and nothing to break it apart. Which brings you to the harder question. Not what happens to a glove or a bag of tools, but what would actually happen to a human body. To answer that honestly, you have to go back 3 years before Ed White ever lost his glove, to a NASA test that almost nobody heard about until decades later. In 1965, a test subject named Jim LeBlanc was inside a vacuum chamber at the Johnson Space Center, wearing a prototype spacesuit, helping engineers understand how a suit might fail in real conditions. During the test, a hose supplying pressure to his suit came loose. The chamber around him was already vacuum. His suit instantly lost pressure too. LeBlanc later described exactly what he felt in the seconds that followed. He said he could feel the saliva on his tongue begin to boil, not violently, just a strange fizzing sensation, because without atmospheric pressure pushing down on it, the moisture on his tongue had nothing stopping it from turning to vapor at a much lower temperature than normal. He didn't feel his blood boil, he didn't freeze. He didn't explode the way movies love to show. He simply lost consciousness within about 14 seconds as the oxygen in his blood ran out because his lungs no longer had any pressure helping that oxygen actually reach his brain. Technicians in the control room saw what was happening and manually repressurized the chamber within roughly 15 seconds. LeBlanc woke up coughing on the chamber floor, fully recovered, and lived for decades afterward, becoming one of the only human beings to ever describe from direct memory what the first moments of real vacuum exposure actually feel like. He later said the last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was the saliva on his tongue fizzing away, and a strange, almost peaceful sense of cold creeping in, nothing like the panic you would expect. There was no pain in the way the body usually signals pain. There was simply less and less air and then nothing. That's the part nobody tells you. Death in the vacuum of space isn't fast in the violent, cinematic way you've been shown. It's fast in a much quieter way. You don't freeze instantly because heat doesn't have much to escape into out there. You don't burst because your skin is strong enough to hold your body together against the pressure difference. What actually gets you is your lungs and your blood losing the ability to deliver oxygen to your brain, all within about 15 seconds, the same 15 seconds LeBlanc lived through and survived only because there were people in a control room close enough to save him. Now take LeBlanc's body and imagine no one is close enough, no control room, no hose to fix, just open space with absolutely nothing around to help and absolutely nothing around to harm you further either. This is where the truth becomes almost worse than the fear. A human body lost in deep space wouldn't rot. It wouldn't decompose the way every single body on Earth eventually does, because decomposition needs bacteria and bacteria need oxygen, and there is no oxygen out there to keep them alive. There's nothing to consume the body at all. In direct sunlight, with no atmosphere to insulate it, the body's remaining moisture would slowly turn directly into vapor and drift away. The same process called sublimation that turns dry ice straight into fog, leaving behind something closer to a freeze-dried husk than anything resembling decay. In shadow, with temperatures dropping toward nearly absolute zero, the body would simply freeze and likely stay frozen for an unimaginably long time, because there's no warmth out there to thaw it and no bacteria left functioning to break it down even if it did. Dr. Jonathan Clark, a former NASA flight surgeon who has spent much of his career studying what happens to the human body during spacecraft decompression events, has said plainly that the popular image of instant freezing or explosive decompression is almost entirely wrong, and that the real danger and the real process is far slower and far stranger than fiction ever bothered to get right. There would be no scream because there's no air around the body to carry the sound, and no air left in the lungs to make one anyway. There would be no visible struggle for long, because consciousness would already be gone within the same 15 seconds LeBlanc lived through. What would remain afterward isn't horror movie gore. It's something closer to a statue, slowly losing whatever moisture sunlight can reach, locked in whatever position the body happened to be in at the final moment, exactly as it was for as long as nothing else ever touches it again. So picture it, not a horror movie corpse. Something closer to Ed White's glove, or that drifting bag of tools, or that lost spatula still cataloged somewhere in a NASA database, except this time, there's no atmosphere a few hundred kilometers below waiting to eventually pull it back down and burn it away into nothing. No ending, no closure, just a single human shape perfectly preserved in the cold and the silence, tumbling end over end in complete darkness, passing the exact same point in its orbit again, and again, and again, for longer than anyone reading this will be remembered by anyone who ever knew them. No funeral, no grave. No final resting place at all, just an endless, silent loop, untouched by anything, because for the first time in the entire history of that body, there would finally be nothing left in the universe capable of changing it. You've probably lost something small without ever noticing the exact moment it happened, and never thought about it again once it was gone. Somewhere above you right now, 27,000 cataloged objects are doing the exact same slow, silent orbit, including a glove that doesn't exist anymore, a bag of tools that doesn't exist anymore, and a spatula that made headlines for being lost forever before it wasn't. Proof that even up there, almost everything eventually comes back down. The only thing that wouldn't is the one thing none of us actually want to think about for very long.